They laughed at her jacket, frayed, faded, and full of mystery, but when a high-ranking military general walked in, the laughter died, his face turned pale, and then he saluted her. She didn't come to be noticed, she came to blend in. But that was impossible in a place like this. Amara Willis, just 25, stood quietly inside the Fort Bragg military commissary, her worn army green jacket clinging to her small frame like it carried its own weight. The jacket was too big, the fabric faded, the patch on her shoulder barely legible, a strange insignia no one recognized. Most assumed it was vintage or maybe stolen. To some, it looked like a bad fashion choice. But to Amara, it was armor, memory, blood. As she waited in line, a small group of young recruits nearby began to snicker, loud enough for her to hear. "Hey, did she dig that jacket out of a war museum?" one joked. Another chimed in, "Looks like stolen valor to me," laughter erupted. They didn't whisper, they didn't care, and Amara, she didn't flinch. She kept her eyes forward, lips sealed, clutching the sleeves as if holding back something deeper. A few bystanders looked away. No one said anything. After all, she wasn't in uniform. She was just invisible to them. Until the doors opened. A sharp gust of wind followed a tall, decorated man in blue, General William Halbrook, recently retired, known across bases nationwide. He stepped into the commissary with quiet command. The room shifted instantly. But then he saw her. His eyes didn't meet hers. They locked on the back of the jacket. And in that instant, the general's face turned pale, his boots froze mid-step. The laughter behind her died like a candle blown out. Because he knew that jacket, and he remembered exactly who wore it last, and what they died for. The room had gone still. You could hear the buzz of the old vending machine in the corner, the distant hum of fluorescent lights overhead. General Halbrook stood motionless. His eyes locked onto the back of Amara's jacket. His chest, covered in ribbons and medals, rose and fell as though he were trying to catch his breath. The young recruits who had just been laughing, their smiles faded into confusion. They exchanged awkward glances. One of them cleared his throat. Another chuckled nervously, unsure if they were in trouble or if they'd just witnessed something they didn't yet understand. Amara hadn't turned around, but she felt the silence, felt the weight behind her shift. Then the general stepped forward slowly, deliberately, like a man approaching something sacred. When he finally stood in front of her, he didn't speak right away. He stared at the name stitched into the inside collar of the jacket, worn but still visible. SGT. Isaac Willis. He swallowed hard. The room was still watching. "Where did you get that jacket?" he asked quietly, his voice low and shaken. Amara looked up. "It was my father's," she replied, calm and proud. "Sergeant Isaac Willis, 3rd Infantry. Killed in Kandahar, 2009. The general's breath caught. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. "I knew your father," he said, his voice cracking now. "He saved my life during a black ops ambush in the mountains." Took a hit meant. "For me, that jacket," he paused, "was on him when we pulled him out." And then, to everyone's shock, even Amara's, the general stood at attention, squared his shoulders and raised his hand to his temple. A full salute to the daughter of a fallen hero. And the room fell into reverent, stunned silence. Amara didn't expect the salute. She didn't even realize she was holding her breath. The young recruits, once laughing, now stood frozen in shame, their eyes darting between the general's trembling hand and the woman they had just mocked. General Halbrook slowly lowered his arm, but his eyes never left the jacket. "He was one of the bravest men I ever served with," the general said, voice gravelly with emotion. "We were on a mission that never made the news. One of those we're never allowed to talk about, but your father, he didn't hesitate. He ran into enemy fire to drag me and 2 others out of a burning Humvee." Amara looked down at the sleeves, her fingers brushing across one of the burn marks near the elbow. "He wrote to me the night before that mission," she said softly. "Said the jacket was his second skin. Told me that if anything ever happened, I should wear it, that it would protect me. Remind me who I come from." The general nodded, slowly, his voice shaking. I never knew he had a daughter. He never talked much about home, but the way he fought, the way he carried himself, he was doing it for someone. One of the younger soldiers stepped forward, his face pale. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we're sorry, we didn't know." Amara didn't look angry, just tired, like someone who had fought invisible battles long before today. "This jacket doesn't need anyone's approval," she said. "It already earned its place." But in that moment, standing tall, wearing her father's legacy, she wasn't just a girl in an old coat anymore. She was a symbol of sacrifice, of memory, of a soldier's story that hadn't ended in war, but lived on in her. For a few long moments, no one moved. It was as if the air itself refused to stir, holding on to the tension of what had just been revealed. General Halbrook cleared his throat, then did something no one expected. He removed a golden insignia pin from his own uniform. Carefully, reverently, he stepped forward and pinned it onto Amara's jacket, just beneath the shoulder patch. "This," he said, "is the Distinguished Service Emblem. It's given to those who show extraordinary character. I never got the chance to honor your father properly, but today I honor both of you." Amara blinked, stunned. "Sir, I'm not military." He smiled. "You don't have to be. Courage runs in the blood." The young recruits, who only minutes earlier had mocked her, now stood at attention. One by one, they approached and offered quiet, sincere apologies, not because they were told to, but because they meant it. One of them, still barely out of training, looked up at her and said, "We judged you by what you wore, not who you are." We forgot that sometimes. The most heroic people wear their stories instead of medals. Lou, the commissary clerk who'd watched the entire scene unfold, stepped out from behind the counter and offered Amara a firm handshake. "This place sees a lot of uniforms," he said, "but I don't think I've ever seen one that carried this much meaning." For the first time in hours, Amara allowed herself a small smile. The room had changed. She hadn't needed to defend herself. The truth did that for her, not with anger, not with revenge, but with legacy and quiet, unshakable pride. As the crowd slowly dispersed and life returned to the commissary, Amara stood still, her father's jacket now heavier than before, not with shame, but with meaning. The general offered her a final salute before quietly slipping out the door. No cameras, no spotlight, just honor. Outside, the wind had picked up. She stepped into the cold with her shoulders back and her head held high. Not because she'd been defended, but because, finally, the jacket had been seen for what it truly was. Not a rag, not a costume, but a quiet monument to a man who gave everything. All her life, Amara had carried pieces of her father, in letters, memories, and that one worn jacket. She thought she had to hide it, to downplay its meaning, to stay silent so others wouldn't question her right to wear it. But now she understood. It was never about proving anything. It was about protecting something sacred. Because in a world that too often judges by surface, by skin, by assumptions, she had worn a story on her back. And today that story spoke louder than any insult ever could. She walked past the young soldiers as they stood aside, watching her go, not with mockery, but with respect. Maybe they'd forget her name. But they would never forget that moment. The moment a general saluted a waitress. The moment a daughter reminded them what sacrifice really looked like. And the moment a battered old jacket, once mocked, became a symbol of honor that silenced an entire room. Sometimes the oldest, most worn things carry the deepest power. What looks like rags to one person may be a badge of honor to another. Amara never asked for recognition. She only wore her father's memory close to her heart. But in a world that's quick to mock and slow to understand sometimes, a worn-out jacket can teach an entire room about humility, legacy, and respect. His story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional, inspiring, and powerful human stories that reveal the truth behind everyday faces.